Good morning. I hope everyone had a good week at whatever you were doing this week, and I hope we had a great week for the first week of school for our students and our teachers. This morning, we're moving from Proverbs to Song of Songs, or sometimes called Song of Solomon. It's from session 12 in our current Sunday School Quarterly, or if you follow in your Bible, it will be from parts of chapters 2 and part of chapter 3. The title is Relational Foundations. The author is still Solomon. There's only one more lesson in this book, but the new books are available at the church. If you'd like to pick one up, you could just go by and pick one up. And I would encourage you to do that, because I think if you read the lesson yourself, you might get more out of it than if you're just listening to me. Now, I think the teacher's book has more scriptures in it than the student book or the participants book, but you would get an understanding probably a whole lot more if you read some of it yourself too. So I'd encourage you to pick one up. Anyway, Song of Solomon is a poem or a song, or it's a collection of poems that celebrates romantic love between a groom and his bride. But because it voices the foundations of a lasting relationship, it can also be compared to Christ's love for his people. Song of Songs actually is from the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, in Ephesians, the church is pictured as the spiritual bride and Christ as the husband. So there is some meaningful application from this lesson that would be relevant to everyone, maybe a little more so to married couples, but something for everybody. In chapter 1 and on to the first part of chapter 2, the man and the woman are introduced. They aren't named, but he is identified as the king. And of course, that means he belongs to society's elite. He's also admired by many of the women in his kingdom. He was a little bit of a heartthrob when he walked through the land. The woman in the poem is a Shulamite woman who had dark skin, and that was from working in the vineyards. So needless to say, she was not a member of the elite class. She was a part of the working class. And this marriage would not have been a typical marriage, because most of them were based on social status or arranged for political reasons, and especially when it came to a king. So prior to the scriptures we begin with, the groom has invited the woman to take a walk through a vineyard in the springtime. So now we're going to go to chapter 2 and verse 15. And it says, "Take us the foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vines, for our vines have tender grapes." Now, it might seem a little bit strange that the topic of conversation on this romantic stroll would be little foxes. Of course, the vineyard was for cultivating grapes, and the tender grapes mentioned in this verse were the blossoms on the vine that would eventually turn into the crop. In our area, when you see grapevines, they're usually running along a trellis or a fence or some sort of structure that holds them off the ground. But for Israel, they mostly ran along the ground unless there happened to be a tree nearby that they could climb. But this woman was very familiar with vineyards because she worked in them. And she knew that the little foxes, even though they were small, could mean disaster for the fruit. Foxes do eat some fruits, but and the vineyards had walls built around them most of the time, but the foxes could burrow underneath the walls, and if they chewed the roots or the vines, they could cause irreparable damage to the entire vineyard. And still you might ask, well, what has this got to do with the prospective married couple? But remember, this chapter in the Bible is a poem, or a group of several poems, and like typical poems, it incorporated figurative language. The foxes represented potential problems in the couple's relationship. If left unchecked, even though they were small, they could literally destroy a vineyard. Small problems in a relationship that are not addressed can fester and reappear later as larger problems. Tiny distractions in a marriage can damage the relationship. And the distractions might not be all bad. They could be in the form of work responsibilities, church duties even, needs of an extended family, or hobbies. But it's anything that takes the valuable time away from each other involved in the marriage or in the relationship. All of these activities are good and they're useful in a person's life, but everything needs to be prioritized. So just as the little foxes can sneak into the vineyard and create damage, tiny distractions grow into big distractions that rob time away from and insert issues into a marriage relationship. And these same kind of distractions and tiny issues can also creep into a believer's life. And after a while, Bible study becomes less. There's no time. Prayer life suffers. I'm too tired tonight to talk, God. Or in the morning, oh, well, God, I've got so much on my to-do list today. I don't have time this morning, but I'll catch up with you tonight. And we just we don't have time to go to church. There's just too much to do. We get ourselves so busy and preoccupied that we begin to try to manage life all by ourselves, and we leave God out of it. And before you know it, we've allowed our relationship with God to suffer. Started with tiny little distractions. All right, now our next verses are 16 and 17. My beloved is mine, and I am his. He feedeth among the lilies. Until the daybreak, which was the coolest part of the day, and the shadows flee. Now, of course, that was the sunset, if you do this figurative language. Until the shadows flee away, turn, my beloved, and be thou like a roe or a young hart upon the mountains of Bether. A roe and a young hart were animals, but they were known for, a roe was like a gazelle, a small, swift animal, but it was known for its beautiful eyes. And a hart was a male deer, but a female deer sometimes was referred to as a hind. Also, it depends on which version of the Bible you're reading. You might have different words, but the bride and the groom in this verse, first verse, have totally committed to each other. They have the kind of mutual submission that builds trust, and then the trust develops an increasing depth of devotion between them that strengthens the marriage. In a previous verse, she had referred to herself as a type of flower, which was a lily of the valley, not the lily spoken of here. The lily of the valley was a wild flower, and it was not as pretty as the cultivated ones. And she felt a little bit insecure because he was so handsome, and her life had been mostly working in the vineyard. And of all the women that he could choose in that kingdom or any other kingdom, he chose her. But she expressed that he was among the lilies, the beautiful women of the kingdom. But she had total trust in him, even though he wasn't in her presence, because she said, my beloved is mine, and I am his. The believers base their relationship with God on trust in him. And the more their trust grows, the deeper their devotion is to him. In verse 17, she described how their love will be intimately expressed after the marriage. The animals she referred to in this verse have no restraint on their innate sexual desire, but she warned other young women not to stir up or wake the sexual love until the time is right. Love is better and more fulfilling when we behave the way that God instructs us to behave. In Proverbs, Solomon repeatedly expressed that our relationship with people, our family, our husbands, our wives, all people, is actually molded by our relationship with God. And for the couple in this poem, mutual submission to God developed and strengthened their submission to each other. All right, now for the next 4 verses, we're going to chapter 3. So it's going to be chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. By night on my bed I sought him whom my soul loveth. I sought him, but I found him not. I will rise now and go about the city and the streets, and in the broad ways I will seek him whom my soul loveth. I sought him, but I found him not. The watchmen that go about the city found me, to whom I say, Saw ye him whom my soul loveth? It was but a little that I passed from them, but I found him, whom my soul loveth. I held him and would not let him go until I had brought him into my mother's house and into the chamber of her that conceived me. Now, if you have ever had to interpret or analyze poetry in English classes, You may have found it hard to understand the figurative language that was used. That was really never my strong point. I guess I'm just more direct, and I wanted the authors to just say what you were thinking. Don't let me have to read between the lines and use words that rhyme. That made it a whole lot more interesting and easy for me to read. But this part of the poem used a lot of figurative language. It's been interpreted in several different ways, but most commonly, it is understood this is the woman recalling her restless night that was filled with dreams. She may have experienced some anxiety about the marriage taking place in the next little bit of time. Her dream started out, it seems like, with good visions of the wedding night, that she was in the bed and she reached out to touch her husband, but he wasn't there. And then it seems like the dream turned into a nightmare. She began to feel an intense sense of insecurity, wondering if the relationship was over. Did he abandon her? Was the wedding called off? Was he in danger? All of the bad things that you think of. We always think the worst, when something happens. And she dreamed that she got out of bed and went out into the streets to look for him. Now, Jerusalem didn't have streetlights, so it would be dark and dangerous and scary, and she was alone. Just all of the feelings that you have during a bad dream. She loved him enough, though, to risk the dangers of the search, and pretty soon she ran into the guards, or actually they found her. They were the watchmen that had two responsibilities. One was to warn the people of a possible attack to the city from outside invaders, and the second one was to warn the people inside the city if there were some fires or some crimes taking place. When she asked if they had seen the one she loved, you would think that they would ask her who she was talking about, or what are you doing out on the streets at night? But it appeared that they just disappeared in her dream. And pretty soon after that, she found her groom. It said, it was just a little after I passed, or that I passed them, that she found him. And she was so excited. She hugged him, which was acceptable before marriage. And then she took him into her mother's house, which signified a place of security. Now, she was from a different economic and social class, but the king readily followed her to her parents' house. He had a palace and a throne. And a lot of people may have thought, if they knew about the relationship, that she didn't deserve his affection. But he followed her into this house that was really beneath anything that he had lived in. But now we may have all had times in our lives when we searched and searched for answers and for peace of mind, or for forgiveness or mercy and grace. And we did it going through some dark and scary times, like the woman from the poem. And when we finally find Jesus, we embrace the love he has for us, and he willingly brings us into the light and out of darkness and into a secure place. And he stepped from his throne into wherever we were, in whatever lifestyle we had, to forgive us and to accept us, just like this groom followed his bride into the mother's home. Now, the last verse is 5, and it says, I charge you, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and by the hinds, those are the female deer and the animals of the field, that you stir not up, nor awake, my love, till he please. In this verse, the woman repeats her warning to the daughters of Jerusalem. Now, we've already said before, if it needed to be heard, sometimes it's said more than once. But this verse should actually be applied to the males and to the females. The charge, once again, is to practice physical restraint, not like the animals mentioned once again, but to restrain your desire until the time is right, and that is after the wedding. The Song of Songs focuses on the intimate love relationship between a man and a woman, but the value of trust, the need to protect the relationship from distractions, and applying needed restraints can also be applied to our relationship with God. If you evaluate your relationship right now with your spouse, if you're married, or right now your relationship with Christ, you might determine some actions that you could take to strengthen one or even both of these relationships. And that's our task for today. Thank you for joining in today. And I hope that we'll all keep our prayers active for our country, through local, state, federal leadership, as far as your mind can reach. And we would have also prayers for researchers that are looking for a way to eradicate or control this COVID that seems to have taken over our world. And keep our children and our teachers in your prayers too. And let's all pray for each other. Stay safe and help keep others safe until we get our lives a little bit back more like we perceive as our normal way of life. And I hope you'll join again. And I thank you for joining in again today.